Hi, this is Scott, the Tall Woodworker. Welcome to my shop. Today I'm going to do something a little bit different. I've been doing a lot of pen turning recently. Today I'm going to turn a pot out of this piece of Ambrosia maple that I picked up at my local woodworking store. This has a really beautiful spalting pattern to it. What's going to be really nice is when you see what the lid is going to look like. I've already prepared it by gluing on a sacrificial block. I'm doing that so that when I screw on the plate, it doesn't put holes deep into it that I then have to turn away. So I'm going to go ahead and get this mounted up, turning on the lathe, and we're going to see what I can turn this into. I start by using a center finder to find the center of the block. Then I position my screw-on plate, and then I'll mount this onto the lathe. My first goal is to create a tenon to mount the chuck to. I want it on the sacrificial board for as little as possible, so that's why I'm focusing on this first. I'm going to create this tenon before I even start to shape this. Now that the tenon is shaped, I brought the block over to my miter saw to cut the corners off. Creating this octagon pattern is a lot easier when you're using bigger things on the lathe. It just cuts a lot faster and it's a lot safer to do. So now I'm going to go ahead and knock off all of the corners. You'll see me stop it from every now and then to check to see if there's any more flat spots. And if I see any flat spots down the line, I typically mark it with a pencil. It makes it easier to identify in the future. Right about here, I notice that it is completely cylindrical, so I mark off where I want the lid to go, and now I start shaping the bottom. At this point, I'm ready to start removing the sacrificial block. After sawing it off, there's only a small bit of the oak remaining, so I'm going to go ahead and turn this away. In just a few seconds, you'll see the really nice spalting pattern that I saw after I sent it through the planer a few times. And if I do say so myself, it was pretty amazing. That was just an awesome pattern to see, and I just had to make it the top of this pot. So the next thing I have to do is create a circle and identify where the screw holes from the mounting plate were still in existence. Even though there was a sacrificial board, I still had to screw into this just a little bit, but it was okay. I only had to remove a little bit of material, and in the end it made a nice wavy pattern on the top that gives it a little bit of character. And here I start creating the line to remove the lid. Before I remove the lid, I decided to start sanding the outside of it. It's a lot easier when it's still part of the main project. Once it's removed, I'm not going to be able to do this very easily because my only way of mounting it to the lathe will be by clamping to the outside. So might as well do this now while it's still attached. And before I remove the top, I'm going to start putting a finish on it. I like to use this butcher block conditioner on projects like these. It absorbs into the wood, but it also creates a bit of a waxy film to it to protect it. I really like the way that this looks, doesn't introduce any type of staining, still gives it much of a sheen, and overall just looks great, especially on figured wood just like this. So we're going to apply a few coats of that, and then we're going to go ahead and remove the lid from the rest of the project. Now I will admit that this was a lot of sawing. It probably took me a good 5 to 8 minutes to actually saw completely through this. Could be that my blade is a little dull, but I eventually got through it. So probably just gonna go look for a new blade, but this wasn't too bad to take care of. I just took a break after this. And now that I got that off, I'm using my center finder again to mark the center for the next step. So this might be a little bit of cheating, but in order to make it easier to bore through and hollow the bowl, I'm going to use a Forstner bit. I don't have a drill chuck for the tailstock of my lathe, so I have to bring it over to my drill press and take care of it here. Additionally, I only have about a 2-inch stroke on my drill press, so right about here I'm doing a little bit of measurement and then raising the table up a bit in order to complete the hollowing out. Again, this just makes it a lot easier for me to turn on the lathe in a little bit. Saves a little bit of time, and it's really difficult when you're hollowing out a bowl. That very center is not the easiest thing to hollow out. So at this point I decided what I'm going to do is create another tenon on the hollow side of the bowl, because before I go too much further I want to get an opportunity to run some sandpaper on the outside. When you're turning a project like this, you're constantly moving the wood in one direction and scraping against it. That can cause the wood grain to fall in one direction, making it really smooth when you run your hand in one way, but if you run it in the opposite direction, it can still feel rough. So by rotating it in the other direction, I'm able to spin this and run just some 80 grit sandpaper. I'm not doing too much here. So just going to run the sandpaper on there to get the grain in one direction, and then we'll flip it back towards the end and sand it the rest of the way. I'm not flipping back and forth over and over again, just this one time. The 80 grit is enough to do this too, and all is good. So before I completely hollow out the bowl, I want to try to get an idea of where the lid needs to come to. So I just drew a template line where I think that it needs to go based on the lid. And we just keep on getting closer and closer to the line, carving out the inside, doing a test fit, rinse and repeat over and over again. At one point I actually got it a little, actually very tight, to the point where I had to use a screwdriver in order to get the lid off. Not that big of a deal, it just was kind of a pain. Unfortunately, right about here is where my camera battery dies, so you didn't see the entire thing, but yeah, I got it to be just a slight snug fit, but unfortunately when I sanded it, it loosened up a bit, so it doesn't have an airtight seal. I'm okay with that in the end, but that's essentially what I had to go through to get that taken care of. So now I'm ready to hollow out the bowl. I typically like to scrape on the outsides and create a diagonal on the inside, and then I'm going to go back to using the square chisel to hollow out the rest of the bowl, just making really light passes, don't want to go too hard on this, and getting it to the final shape. Here you can see the square chisel doing what it needs to do, and again, my idea is to try to mirror the inside to the outside as much as I can. It's really difficult unless you have calipers to measure, but I'm just using my fingers to do some rough measurements, cleaning out the bottom there, and then we'll hollow out the rest of the sides. And here I'm ready to start sanding. I've gotten this to the shape that I want. I'm using a sanding sponge pad to contour to the bowl. I'm hoping to get an actual bowl turner's sander soon, so I don't have to use a pair of vice clamps on a piece that's technically meant to go on a drill. But it works. It does the trick, you know, and sometimes you have to improvise. So when I deal with wood projects, I usually step up from 80 grits to 180 grits, then to 240, and then I'll decide if I want to do a 320. I think for this project, I just went up to 240, and it was plenty smooth for the finish that I was going to choose. And right here, I'm going to use more of the butcher block conditioner to coat the inside and then the outside with the finish. Again, this is a natural finish, so looks really nice, doesn't leave any weird oils or residues, just like the way that it looks altogether. Because there's a bit of wax in there, you want to use a little bit of pressure, and that kind of starts to harden it. It's not a true beeswax finish where that's the way that you apply it is with friction and heat. But I do notice that as you're buffing it out, it does get a much better finish than if you just wipe it on and let it sit. So here I'm mounting the lid to the lathe so I can clean that up. It's a bit rough from when I sawed it off earlier, so I'm just going to clean it up, flatten it out, and then we're going to sand this side of it and apply the finish here as well. Right there I'm marking where there's some pretty uneven spots from using the handsaw, and you can see that the lathe takes a really quick job of taking care of those. So it was pretty quick at getting this thing flat, and we'll be starting a finish on this pretty soon. And now that the lid is finished, we're going to mount the bowl back on so that we can finish the underside. Since I sanded it earlier, it's just straight to the finish, and we're going to turn it and apply a little bit of heat, buff it out, and we'll be done. And there you go. That is a pot made out of an Ambrosia maple. Love the way that the pattern comes out, especially with the mineral oil and wax finish that I applied on it. The little bit of character that the bug holes that are around this gives you is just awesome. I still need to put a knob on the top just to complete the look, but that's the finished pot. So if you like what you saw today, hit the thumbs up icon. And I hope that you subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon to be notified when I make new projects. Until next time, thank you for coming to my shop.